Hello, I'm Butch. I like to make ball joint figures and their accessories. In this video, I'm going to show you how I quickly and easily, emphasis on the easy, most times I build a doll. I do it in about 2 weeks, but it takes about another week for accessories and another week for editing. But realistically, I can make a doll every 2 weeks. So if you're looking for an easy method to make a ball joint doll for your first time, or just a different one, let's get into this. First, I always start with beads. I make these jigs. They save a huge amount of time. I would recommend it to anybody. A doll will have anywhere from 18 to 24 beads to make, and it's a big time saver. Something that used to take a day and a half for me, I can do in 4 hours. And if I have a problem with a bead or I need a different color or a different size, I can make it in a snap. I like to build my feet and hands at the same time. These are some eyes that I'm going to use for the skull that I usually cast. After you have everything baked up, this is that skull I was talking about, I make hands that are mitts. This is actually going to end up being the waist. I like to make like a little triangle to start everything off so I can drill a hole. I put a little bit of a triangle on the front, and then there'll be a little square to go on the back. These will just help keep the beads in a socket. It'll actually start making the socket. A little piece on the top, and then just a quick form to get my center hole, make sure everything's going to be square when I make the figure. When I put these pieces on, I make sure I use Bacon Bond. It's an adhesive that helps the polymer clay shape up really well. Here I'm going to kind of make like a shirt, start bulking up the body. The upper torso is basically just a square bead that I drill a T-hole through. Most of the bead work, I have a second video. If you want to check out how to make the beads, just check them out in my playlist. This belt actually ends up being a big waste of time. I end up cutting it off later. And here we're making some things to make sure that it looks like a female character. Don't want to have any hands on there too much. Got to keep it all friendly for the kids if there's any watching. I don't make these videos for kids, but I don't swear. There's no shenanigans, so it's safe for them. Here I'm making a shirt and the collars. I like the Attack on Titan characters that have the collars under the jackets, not just a open neck shirt. When I cut the collar, I cut 2 of them at the same time. The others circled here. I like to cut them at the same time so I get a good mirrored shape. I do make body blanks sometimes, but I actually prefer to form clothing on my figures. It just makes them look finished, and I grew up with action figures, and it just reminds me more of an action figure than a doll this way. So we'll put a shirt on her. I like to form a lot of the details first before I drape it over. I don't have to worry about doing the back and sides and stuff because she's going to have a jacket on. When I go to put the collars on, I'll put this Bacon Bond on. It's an adhesive, and it makes the 2 pieces one again. I use it all over the place. I might not show it or tell you as often, but anytime I'm putting fresh clay onto fresh clay or fresh clay onto baked clay, I'll be using this Bacon Bond. If you put it with fresh to fresh and you leave it for a few minutes and then go back to it, it almost helps mold the 2 together for you. And it makes it really easy to blend in that seam line. Now you're probably noticing that I've wrapped all the beads in aluminum foil. This foil helps keep the beads from being baked to the pieces. I find when you use the actual bead in the joint when you're making the socket, everything moves a lot smoother and a lot tighter. My dolls actually have the ability to do stop motion and stand on their own. It's kind of a criteria for the dolls I build. Now this process I do how they're all on the bar. This actually keeps it so I don't have to handle the pieces too often, so it keeps fingerprints down to a minimum. And when I bake it, I bake them on the bars standing up on a piece of wood. Nothing lies down. These bars I build on are actually tattoo bars. You can see these ones have the eyelets still on the arms. They're made of stainless steel, they're thin, and polymer clay does not stick to them whatsoever. When I was doing the jacket, I didn't worry about trying to do it all in one piece because the jacket has seams. So I made it so the pieces, as I stuck them on, would line up about where the seam lines are in the outfit. I did try to keep the whole character and outfit pretty close to the cartoon, but for most of it I was just doing it from pictures off my phone. But I am a fan of the Attack on Titan show, and when you see our ODM gear, you're going to notice there's a part missing. My excuse for that is this character traded it for a pork chop. The inside collar was a bit of a dream. It took a couple attempts to get this outside collar to look right. But finally I got a decent enough collar that I was happy enough to actually stick it down. I actually ended up having to do it in 3 pieces. The little triangles at the end are separate. With a little fold down and a little patting and shaping, I'm ready to put the patch on the back. I don't really have the best paints or brushes at the moment, so the patch actually ended up staying blank. I should have actually did one in polymer clay, some design on it. Here I'm making the pouches for the front. I wanted the pouches to look full, because if you know the character I'm talking about, yeah, there's going to be goodies packed in those. I find it's the tiny little details that you add to the characters that finish them out and make them look more complete. If I was actually building this doll without the jacket, without the boots, without anything on her, just a doll blank, it would only take a week for me to build. I could actually build it in 3 days. Doing all these little outfit parts on it to make it look like an action figure, that takes about an extra week to actually make the doll. On this figure, the jacket is kind of iconic for the characters in Attack on Titan, so I made sure I put a little bit more time in it to make sure the jacket looked right, and the rest of the outfit, color-wise and scheme, was pretty close. Here we're going to bulk up the legs. When I make my legs, I make a little post that's hollow, and I trim them so that they act like a spacer for me to build my legs around. I do the same thing when I build arms, and before I put the polymer clay on top of that tube that I've built out of polymer clay, I make sure I put bacon bond on it. You can see it on the lower leg there, the shiny stuff. When I built this leg, I actually should have waited and put these straps on when I was sculpting the leg so I could dimple them down like I did that strap on the chest. Because afterwards I had to go in and muck around a bit to make it look more like cloth and not so smooth. I wish I would have put all the ripples in first and then dented it down so the straps. But I've only been at this about a little under 1.5 years, and I'm still learning myself. But I'm learning all sorts of stuff, and I'm excited to share it with everybody and anybody. It's kind of funny and ironic, actually, when I got into this. Trying to find information that was quick and easy was almost impossible. It's almost shrouded in secrecy. Eventually, I'd like to get big enough that I could get a little Discord going so that a whole community of us can just all talk and share pictures and tips and tricks. I've tried this on Facebook, and it's all adopt me this, Etsy that, and that's just not me. There we go, a calf made easily. The arms are made exactly the same way as the legs. You'll see that the tin foil where the beads are wrapped, the middle one is flared out where the beads would bend. It lets me know where the joint is going to need that extra little cupping so that it'd be able to actually do that better than 90 bend. Here I'm just adding some squigglies to make it look more like a jacket. It ended up being too smooth. But you can always add and cut and sand. Eventually you'll get exactly what you want. Little patience. And for me, a lot of times it's close enough. I don't go overboard with the dolls because I'm just going to build another one next month. And if I keep just trying to perfect one doll, I would spend the whole year on just that one doll. Easily. Meanwhile, I'm all about learning a new technique. If I was just to specialize on one doll, I wouldn't be on my 8th face. And each face I sculpt gets better. Each doll I build gets better. Here we're making fingers. My dolls have opening and closing hands. And the easiest way to do it is to actually just fold the polymer clay over it instead of trying to drill it. So I'll put a little pin, so I'll have a little hole. That's actually the pin I'll use for securing my elastics after at the end. I'll make some little fingers and then I'll shape it to a good holding position. Now if it seems like I'm rushing a bit on the hands and stuff, don't worry, shortly I will have a whole series of how to build all the different parts. My next doll figure that I'm making, and currently in the making of, as I make all her parts, the beads, the waist, arms and legs, hands and feet, I'm going to produce a how-to video with each part as I build on her separately, so that each one will be its own standalone video on how to build a part. The same playlist is also going to end up having a lot of the accessories I build, like this girl's going to have what's called ODM gear. That, how I build that, will also be in that kind of playlist also. I'm just all about sharing how I do everything. Here we're making some boots. First I'll start with the bottom sole. There's some bacon bond there. I'll set it aside for a couple minutes and then get back at it. Here we're going to make the knee pads to make the boots look like they come up higher. The lower legs are already baked, so it's just a matter of attaching them and blending them in. While I'm blending these in, I actually have both the feet sitting aside with that bacon bond doing its job, so that when I'm done doing both these knee pads, I can grab the feet. And that thing is stuck there. Like, if you try to pull that off right now, you will destroy that little sheet that you stuck on. I have a tendency to use scissors to trim a lot of stuff. I actually like how it rounds both sides. When you cut with a razor, it'll indent the top and leave a crisp cut on the bottom. I find with scissors, it eliminates that. It rounds it at both tops. For some things, that's actually a look I want to have. My favorite part about building ball joint dolls like this is I sand almost nothing. There's a little bit of drilling. Okay, a whole lot of drilling. A day's worth of drilling. All the beads, all the body parts. But there's no sanding really. Sometimes I'll sand a little bit on the bead for the torso where it pivots, but that's about it. Everything I try to sculpt as smooth and level and square as I possibly can. Well, that's torso, arms, legs finished, so we're into head now. I like to bake the back of the head to the size that it's going to be so that when I'm sculpting I can put my finger back there. The jaw's next. When I do the jaw, I should really do the mouth next time. When I do the head, I like to do it on a skull. What it does is it lets me do a face build from a known point so that I can try and improve my facial sculpting skills. Yeah, that's how we're going to put that. The little eyes that I casted at the start and glued in, they have a little dimple hole in them so I can fill them with different polymer clays. I'll put a light and a dark one in there and mush them all together and kind of get a two-tone kind of effect for the iris. It's a little ironic that I concentrate and build in color so much and I don't see any of it. Here we're going to sculpt in, put some shape to those eyes. The head design I'm trying to go for more nowadays is I really like the anime look. And with the skull center that I use, I can always put great big eyeballs or little eyeballs so that I can experiment with different looks. But right now, I'm really into the big eyeball look. I'm still learning these days myself, and I'm really thinking that next time I shape the jaw is when I'm going to do the mouth. Doing the mouth at the end is okay, but I think I would get a much better and expressive looking mouth if I do it when I do the jawline itself. Like I said, I'm not quite fully into painting yet, so the eyebrows, I put them on. I like doing the hair. I can put a lot of time on doing hair. I really enjoy making characters' hair. A lot of my characters actually have more than one hair per figure. This girl, she only has one set of hair, so it's actually going to end up getting glued on after. Often when I make characters, they have two sets of hair and an interchangeable helmet, either one they can wear on their head or one that they can swap the head out for. Because this character has neither of those, I opted to actually put her head on without my usual peg system. There's no clothing or anything, so her head is actually strung into her body, more of a traditional ball joint doll style. I dice up all the pieces before I put them on a girl's head. Pretty good. I've even braided it before for some of my characters. I do have a tendency to put a lot of them in ponytails. Mostly it's not because I can't sculpt the other hair. It has a tendency to do with the mobility of the head so that I can get some good tilting and look forward and back. Often the hair hinders looking up. Although I have made a few wigs before, and I think I might actually one of these days glue welts to the head. Here we're making her belt for her ODM gear. Now I do like to make it so my belts and accessories, a lot of the stuff can come off and on. I don't like to commit to having only one look. So in this one, I didn't want the belt to come off because the belt is kind of part of the outfit. But the ODM gear and the sword cases had to come off and on. So I turned to one of my favorite fabrics to play with, and that's hockey tape. I love playing with hockey tape. I've used it for years for making stuff. I used it as a kid for making stuff for my He-Mans and G.I. Joes. Once this tape sticks to itself, it is pretty much stuck. And I have found that with just a small little smidgen of crazy glue, you'll never get this stuff apart. And because it's cloth, you can paint it after. So, in order for my ODM gear to come off and on, I've left these little passages so that I can have steel pegs come down through. I found bending just a little bit of wire around a strip of tape makes a wicked belt and buckle. With the belt and buckle and a little bit of glue, everything's going to just look and feel just right. Best thing is, once you paint hockey tape, and if you know anything about hockey tape, it never comes apart once it sticks to itself. And once you paint it, it will never come apart. Here you can see the 3 tabs that I have, these are actually passages. Because paper towel is 2-ply, if you cut a thin little strip and put it in there, it actually splits apart and leaves a little passage, a little chasm that is going to make it so that I can slide my ODM gear off and on. Because the belt has like belt loops, I stick some on. I put a little dab of glue, a little line of it, ever so thinly, and then stick the tape on. I trim the tops so that they're a little long, so they'll be able to fold over and stick to the inside. Anytime I play with my fabric tape and use it in this fashion, I will take a piece of paper towel and I'll split it so that I'm only playing with 1-ply. When you stick that 1-ply to that hockey tape, it backs onto it and never comes off. Here's that little body skirt. You can see the bottom parts where that paper towel is. You don't have to get real close to trimming, because when I paint it, I'll use washes. And the wash will actually disintegrate any paper towel that's hanging out. And with that, her belt is complete. Now, this is going to be my first figure that I've painted. So I figured I'd just start with some washes. I don't have any expensive paints. Mine are some of the cheapest. And the brushes I have are whatever I've got kicking around right now. As I get more into it, I will buy some better brushes so I can paint them better. But most of the time I just use what I have on hand. The paints I'm using are some cheap acrylics from our local Walmart, watered down with, yes, some water. I don't have any flow improver or anything like that yet, so again, using what I got. But because it's polymer clay, and because the paints I'm using are non-toxic and water-based, they stay a little tacky afterwards because of the water that they've been diluted with. But I'll stick them back in the oven at my cure temperature for my Sculpey premo, which is about 275 degrees, and I pop them in for another 15-minute bake. So far I haven't gotten any toxic odors or any smell. I can't even tell that I've painted them that way. And when they come out of the oven, the paint is all cured right to the polymer clay, and the tackiness is almost instantaneously gone. I do all this on a very, very low budget at the corner of my kitchen table. So you're not going to really see any specialty stuff come out of me. I do have an airbrush, but you'll probably never see me break it out. Although for the first time painting one of my figures, I've actually enjoyed it, and I really like what it adds to it. So far I've just been doing some washes and some dry brushing on them, but with already doing everything in color, it's already instantly primed. I like to do the washes before I do the dry brushing. That little extra paint on it first just kind of makes the dry brush go across things nicer. I did experiment on a few pieces, scrap pieces I have kicking around first. Yeah, never get rid of those scrap things that you've made or something that was too big, because you need to test a paint, you need to test a glue, you need to test a technique. Grab out that little extra piece and test away. I do it a lot, actually. I experiment with everything. It was actually a friend in my Facebook group that advised me that I should probably paint them. He said it'd just take them to another level, and he was absolutely right. Which was just in line with me anyways, because I'm constantly pushing what I do with these figures. So far I've figured out how to make posable tails. I gave a girl 6 posable arms, and I think I've just cracked how to make posable wings. I really like the way that the dry brush made her hair pop. Yeah, I owe a big thanks to my friend, that's for sure. Now back to my other rambling. Yeah, I probably got about 50 figures that I want to make that are already known figures. There's another probably 100 that I'd love to make that are just from my own creation. And then there's a few that I want to hold for some milestones. I would like to make a bike rider that is on Akira's bike, which is something I'd like to make. Accessories are almost as much fun for me to make as the dolls. I also like to build mechs. So to have like maybe something like the Halo Cyclops would be a really cool mech for a character to sit in. I'd love to build one of those. And my all-time reason to actually get into ball joint making dolls was so that I could make a fully posable dragon, which I'm very close to doing now. And I would love to build a dragon rider. Now there's only one character even more than the dragon rider I want to make. And if you're a Dungeons and Dragons fan, if I say the name Lolth, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. And I want to use these for milestone ones, but I might just build one before that. I have a tendency to get off topic about what's going on versus what I'm talking about. That's because I don't think you really want to hear me talk about how I'm painting buttonholes with a toothpick. I'm actually really excited about ball joint dolls, and I love talking and exploring ball joint dolls with other people. The problem is my community's pretty small when it comes to that. So when I get on here showing people how I build them, for the most part, I don't have to show them how to roll clay. So, might as well get to being friendly. Now this little bit I have in the hand drill, and I have two of these black hand drills. This tapered one is actually a Dremel bit, it's a shaper. It works great for expanding the holes, centering holes. These are the drill bits that actually came with it, except for this great big honking one. And those are all the drill bits I use for actually drilling out the body, the arms, the legs. The steel bar I form on is just a little thinner than the elastic that I use. So I drill them out so that the elastic has moving room. If the elastic's tight, it binds up the doll, and I find it doesn't really move as well as if it was all loose with good tautness. This is actually a test elastic. I have put together over a dozen dolls with this elastic so far. I use it to test assemble my dolls and have them pretty much together so I can figure out how big I need to make the specific elastic for this specific doll. Too much tension, the doll barely moves, or it will move properly or stands incorrectly. Not enough tension and it crumples to the ground. And I really like my dolls to be able to stand on their own. Like I said before, I play a little bit with stop motion animation with these dolls, and they handle it very nicely. But so far in this whole assembly, other than drilling, I haven't had to sand any joint areas, trim away any material. Now, when I build my pegs, my hip beads, it has like a shoulder peg that hangs out. It's actually a bit of a stir stick. But when it pops down into that thigh, when you go to move the leg in the socket, it moves like a joint should, almost like a boughten figure. And a little trick is when I'm drilling out my parts, I don't start with the biggest or the end drill bit size I want. I start with the smallest one and slowly go up in increments. If you try to force a great big drill bit down a little piece and drill it all out in one hop, the odds are you're going to crack it. So I drill it out slowly with one drill bit slightly bigger than the next, slightly bigger, slowly expanding that hole diameter. But see, with no trimming, no test fit, like from just making it to just sticking it together, the movement in the way I build these dolls is almost perfect every time. Now this is the foot, this is how I connect the foot. I drill a hole almost all the way through the heel, but not quite. And then I drill a small little hole intersecting it, but going center through the hole. This is because where the elastic goes in, the elastic's doubled. And this is just a little push pin that's been cut short. I like to leave the heads on them. If you cut the head off and slide it in the hole, it almost completely disappears. But that little peg that I slide in that hole is actually what the elastic hooks around so that I get my tension. The range of motion this doll has, and I'm just assembling it. I haven't trimmed it. I haven't fitted it. It's just drilled and put together. Doing the smaller beads for the arms, I go really slow. I actually end up drilling them out pretty big. The head, I'll drill a hole just big enough so I can slide the knot from that little string down in it. And then I will crazy glue or gorilla glue it to death. And then I'll put even more down in the hole, and I'll shove it down in, and then I'll put more in, and then I'll put more in. With the head with the cable now, I can actually see how big the elastic needs to be. Because I want a loop at each end, I will pull to measure my tautness. And then I'll mark it with a pen. Most times when I make my elastics, it'll be a figure 8. So right here we've got one length to go from the neck to the leg. And I'll mark it on the elastic with the pen, and that'll give me a center mark. Now I'll mark the other leg the same way. And this will give me 4 sections on this piece of elastic. Then afterwards I can sew them all up. I take the 2 free ends and I bring them to the middle. And then I sew them in the middle, forming a figure 8 shape. The elastic I use is actually a round elastic out of the sewing department from Walmart. I do everything on the cheap. But here you can see kind of what the shape's going to look like. End for end to the center, and then I'll sew them there. And then that'll give me the long length I need to go from the center to the foot. And with the double elastic, it gets a really strong, stable tension. I do the same for the arms. Again, it ends up being a figure 8, but instead of having to measure it out in the 4 sections, I can just stretch it across and make one big loop. I still end up with a figure 8. I just don't have to color on it with the pen so much. Again, easy. But with our figure 8s complete, we are almost done. We are on the assembly line now for this doll. I use, these are a pair of really thin guitar strings. I think they're a 0.09. And I like them because they got a little flex to them. They don't like to really bend. They're super thin and they stay straight. Almost act like a sewing needle. They're actually just a length of wire that I folded in half, and that's it. But because everything was drilled out and test fitted on the fittings elastic, this part just flies. Now when I'm feeding the elastic, I do like to keep the right side on the right side and the left side on the left side. If you let the elastics bind up inside the body, it messes with the tension and you'll never really get your legs and arms to stay where you want them to or behave the way you want them to. This is about my favorite time because right now I'm also thinking about the accessories that are going to go with this character and the base I want to build for it to stand on. Believe it or not, for me, the character's only half done, even once I fully assemble it here. Now I do use a pair of locking forceps. I got these again at Walmart, and they came out of the fishing department. This is almost impossible to do without at least one pair of them. 2 pairs make it so much easier. Here's that. It's just a regular sewing pin. Pulling on the doll moves the elastic from left to right and helps center everything so that there is equal tension from left to right. Tension is everything when it comes to a ball joint doll. You can have the best joint, but if you have no tension, the joint will never work. It'll always be sloppy. Again, if you have the perfect joint, socket for the ball to roll in, and you have too much pressure, it may never want to roll in that socket. Now when I hook the hands together, I actually make a little chasm in the fingers. It's but one of the few things that I can't hide when I make a doll, but there's always going to be 3 spots that I can't not help but have them. And that's where the fingers move, where the elbows move, and the back of the knees. The shoulders and the hips, yeah, you can get that slot to hide if you make everything right. But for the elbows and the back of the knees, impossible to hide. And again with the fingers, impossible to hide. Everything on a ball joint doll to me is just basically a candy necklace. They're all different shapes of beads. I do like doing the hands this way because it fits real well. It locks nicely. It makes joining very simple. And who doesn't like an action figure that has opening and closing hands that can hold things? You can only hide so much in a ball joint doll. And at 12th scale, 6 inches tall, it's hard to hide a lot. This is not only the first character I've ever painted, this is also the first character that's only ever had one set of hair, so I glued the hair to the head. Half of that is because when I formed the hair and I baked it, it had a small little crack. Not anything that I couldn't keep playing with, but I just didn't ever want it to get worse. And without a second set of hair, it was just easier to glue it on. And there, we have arms. The neck moves excellent. I wanted to test it before I put the hair on. This is a new neck bead that I've been playing with, and I wanted it to see how well it moved, and oh, I'm so happy, so pleased. I'm constantly playing around. Here's a little just Gorilla Glue, just to stick that hair on so that that crack doesn't get any worse. And like I said, I like to make all the accessories. And why not make her knife or sword out of steel? When I was younger, I used to make a lot of my dolls and my action figures, and yeah, I like pouches that work. I like swords and knives that are real, and bows that fire. Here's her with her ODM gear. Both of these can actually come off, and the part that's on her belt can even come off. Both swords can be drawn out of the scabbards. I'd like to thank you all for checking out my video. Give a like, a subscribe, and a notify. That way you won't miss out on my next creation. And there's one every month. And thank you again. Until next time, let's see what else we can bring to life.